Well, thank you ever so much for agreeing to talk to me today, Amanda. I think that this conversation will help so many media professionals understand the importance of communicating and communicating effectively during a crisis. So
Mhm.
thank you. For
No, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. For those people who aren't familiar with Amanda's work, Amanda led the comms team during the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. She is also the writer of Crisis Communication Strategy. So I am extremely privileged to be able to talk to you today.
No, it's good to be here. Yeah, and it's a really important conversation.
Without further ado, shall we dive straight in and
Mm.
talk about the current situation in India and maybe analyze their comms strategy a little bit? But it's over to you, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult because what I'm seeing sort of secondhand. You're seeing it through the media here, and I have to say, I think the media here have started to do quite a good job at highlighting the issue, because this has obviously been happening for I think we were on sort of 6-7 days now. And the media focus is really important, because it means that people see how they can help. You've seen governments come forward now being able to offer kind of support, and oxygen and that kind of thing. So the media have a really key role to play because they help to kind of shine a light on things. And given that, the one thing we've realized, I think, in the last year is how the world is a very small place, and things that are affecting one country, actually they impact on all of us. So it feels really difficult for me when we see a lot of focus on how great the UK's vaccine program is and things like that, and at the same time you've got such a horrendous humanitarian disaster almost happening in India at the minute. So yeah, so it is really difficult to for me to analyze, I suppose, the way things are managed in India, because I'm kind of not there. All I can see is how things are kind of playing out here. But what appears to be happening is that there is a real there's been a kind of real lack of focus, I suppose. And what you need at the start of something like this is some swift action and swift decisions, to try and move things along and get things back on track. But it is such a horrendous situation that it just makes my heart go out for people living through that.
Definitely. I think India as a country as well is so diverse, and therefore it is a difficult country, I suppose, to govern as well as to communicate to. Um, I I conducted a small bit of research where I spoke to a few of my mates in India, and what I gathered from that research was that people are now relying on social media for news. And out of the 20 odd people I spoke to, there was only one person who said that they were getting their news from the Ministry of Health Facebook page. So I suppose this is another thing that usually comes up in crisis comms, doesn't it? I think you spoke about it when you were talking to us about the comms management during the time of the Manchester attack. It's when you don't put out your information out there, people look at information on different sources, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need to be saying as much as you can, as quickly as you can. You need to be in the first instance with these sorts of situations. This is about preserving and protecting life. So it is, what is it that people need to do? What is it that they can do? And I was really shocked to hear in one report this morning that there were people who were being criticised for turning up at hospitals, because they shouldn't be there. But don't criticize them, tell them what they should do, explain to them where they need to go. And I think you've picked on a really important point, which is that it's very easy for us to write plans, that crisis communications plans, that say we will do this, we will communicate using these methods. That's fine, but actually if the people you need to get to are using different kind of methods of gathering information, you have to go there. So you've got to get much more sophisticated. Where are the people you need to speak to? And as you said, if 19 of those 20 people are all using different social media sources, then get your information out on those social media sites. Get that information being shared by different people so that they start to see it in lots of different ways, and they're seeing it on lots of different people's timelines, and people are talking about what's happening, rather than hope that people will come to you, because we know that's not going to happen. People go where they're most comfortable, where they get most of their information on a daily basis. They may occasionally, we've seen over last year, look a little bit more towards official news sites, as corroboration, but actually they get the information from lots of other places first.
Yeah, 100%. I think you make a really good point once again about the main point of crisis comms is to put people first.
Mm.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about this as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my big kind of points that I always talk about whenever I'm talking about crisis communication, and it was learning that came out from the arena, really, which is the plans and policies and procedures are all great, and you need them, and you need to have that kind of documents and things in place. But actually, if none of them are rooted in what matters, which is the people who are affected, then you can never have, for me, an effective crisis communication response. It's like I was just saying, the focus should not be on criticizing people who are struggling to understand what they should do. What you need to do is offer them the support, tell them where they need to go, give them some guidance, whatever that has to be in the kind of current situation. So you've got to put yourself kind of in their shoes almost. It's like you've got to understand what they're going through. And when you're in an organization or you're in a business and you're dealing with a crisis, you can feel like in a bubble. You're almost in your little bubble because you're dealing with the information you've got, and actually you have to take yourself outside of that. You have to look at what it looks like for everybody else, what it looks like for people who are dealing with the aftermath of that crisis, and tailor your messages accordingly. It's really important, because that's when you kind of, if you don't do that, you really miss the emotion and the feeling and the tone and where people are. So it's really important that you step out of your bubble, look at the situation from the outside, and make sure that the whole thing is focused on how can you help people, how can you help people get through this situation, with as little kind of impact on them as possible.
Yeah. What would your recommendation be in this case, Amanda? Now, what if the government comms channel hasn't got as wide a reach as you would like it to have? In such an instance, how would a comms team deliver?
Yeah, there's lots of things you can do. I mean, the key bit, as I said, is you go where people are. So where the most people you need to speak to. Where is it that the information's being shared? Where is it that people are talking about what's happening or asking for help or whatever? And go there. So if it needs to be putting lots of information out through social media channels, then do that. If it's about then connecting with kind of, like you say, or places all work very differently, and India's a massive country. It's got lots of different aspects to it. So perhaps you need then for those people to get it from a local source. So stop trying to work too much centrally. Yes, you've got the messages and the information at that central point, but actually then ask those people who are in localized areas for them to then circulate it, because often people have much more trust of those that they know more from a local perspective than they do for kind of national institutions. So again, look to those. It's about really, where do people get the best information? Who do they trust? And try and get the messages through those sources. And those could be a whole range of different things. But absolutely, as I said, it's not about people coming to you. They're in the middle of a trauma, they're in the middle of a crisis. They just need things really easily to hand, and they don't want to have to go searching through websites, Facebook pages, whatever, to try and find the information they need.
Definitely. I think that's definitely the case there right now, because people are so confused. Like you mentioned, someone got backlashed for showing up at a
Mm.
hospital. And actually that's what you would do in a situation like this, when you if you don't know
Yeah,
where to look for the information. Um
yeah.
quick question as well, Amanda. If we were to reverse the situation, if this was to be like the situation in the UK, I know we didn't spike as much, but if that was the situation here, what would have been the best course of action for the UK government, according to
Yeah, I mean, you say that, and I look at what's happening in India and think that could be anywhere.
you?
We know this from what we've lived through. We can't just say we've been through a year of COVID and we've got some vaccinations, we've got the restrictions starting to be lifted, we're going to be okay. could end up in a similar position, so there's no way we can kind of turn our backs on what's happening, or they definitely shouldn't. But I think in terms of what here, you would want to see the same thing, which is, get the messages out quickly, get the messages of what people need to do. Do they need to stay at home? Do they need to avoid being in groups? What is the practical information that they need about the situation that they're dealing with? And trust people, because you've got to take people on this kind of journey of dealing with the crisis. You've got to have them working with you. You've got to have them listening to what's being said. So try and have that as an ongoing conversation. Yes, the messages will change as the kind of phases of the crisis change. So they're not going to be necessarily the same all the way through. And I think we failed in some of that with the UK approach first time round, in that people seem to go, oh, well, you said we had to do these things, now you're saying we have to do these other things, and that's because you can't just broadcast at people. You need to be able to take them into a conversation. Yes, there's some urgent things you have to do straight away, but what you want to do after that, as soon as you can, is start to get to here's where we are, this is what it's going to look like, these are how things are going to change, and listen to people about how their experiences are and what they need. If we've done a bit more listening with some of the things we've had over the last year, we perhaps would have moved further forward, or moved forward more quickly, because you would have known that we had BME communities that weren't taking vaccines, that right back at the start of all this were not actually getting the messages. So you've got to look at a whole range of things. But yeah, definitely for me, trust some of those local networks to be able to share that information. I think those are incredibly strong, and we don't realize how much, if you can get into, I would say, on a very, very local basis, if you can get into Facebook groups that involve local residents, you get a lot of support, you get a lot of feedback, and people start to talk about what's happening, they start to talk about what they need to do. So it's almost trying to make sure you can cascade, stop having too much central control. Set the this is what we need to do, set the this is what the messages are, but then entrust it into people at a whole range of levels, because that's where the biggest difference comes. If you're really trying to reach everybody, and getting into those very local groups, those local conversations, will make the biggest difference.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think this answers my previous question about how do you communicate in a diverse country like India. I think the answer is by breaking it down, maybe collaborating with people in local groups, as you say. So no,
Yeah.
that's definitely a very good point. Amanda, I also wanted to talk a little bit about crisis communication across cultures, if that's okay. Because it is understood, or there is this perceived notion that the crisis communication theories and methods are quite Western centric. How do you think this is different, and how can different cultures adapt to maybe one model, if so?
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and I think that comes from where have the academics been based, where predominantly of the books being produced, and I put myself in that. So you come from your own experiences and your own perspective. I think there is definitely a need to make sure that that you don't hold fast on a certain approach if it's not going to work in a particular area. So it's really important, and some of the work I do, if I'm working in a different country, is to have people there who understand the culture and the country in a much better way than I ever could, so that they can go, actually that's not the same here, or that doesn't work here, or we've got these sorts of issues. I do think there is the key principles. If you boiled crisis communication though right down to some essences, and the clear principles, I think those would be universal. So I think it's try and use, boil it right down to the basics, and then build it back up in the way that works, for whichever country or area that you're working in. Because things like putting people first, listening to people, having a conversation, moving quickly to try and protect lives, having that honesty, and openness and transparency, which is so important because people have got to trust you. It's all about a trust relationship, where people will work with institutions and governments to get through things together. So I think those for me would be things that you want to hold as universal in any kind of pressure or crisis situation. The methods by which you kind of build that up will vary, and I think that's the bit that obviously you work with people who know the area really well, like you're saying, you know the way India works with different places and how that networks, and you find the best ways to make that happen then.
100%. I think a really good point you made there was honesty and transparency. I mean, we live in a time where you don't know what to trust. You don't know if the news you're looking at is fake or if it's real. So that is such a good point. Which leads me on to my next question, Amanda. As comms professionals, is there a way that you can spread positivity during a time like this, or do you have to put the facts out? I suppose there's a fine line between trying to make people feel like everything is okay, but at the same time also informing them of the accurate numbers. No?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a difficult one, and I often feel with the work I do that you're kind of the person bringing the doom into the room, but it's not the case. I think the honesty you need to have. So you need to make sure that people understand the situation, and they understand. I think again hearing today that things are likely to be difficult for it in India, probably for the next 10 days. So there's no shying away from that. And you would lose trust and confidence if you were saying, no, everything will be fine tomorrow. Don't worry, this is going to be fine tomorrow, because it isn't. And I think there's an honesty around that. I think the positivity has to come from how can you move it forward? What's the positive actions you can take? How can we make this the impact of this less? How can we kind of really maximize the positivity that's coming in, if there's help coming in from different parts of the world, if the support coming in, and help people feel as though they're not alone, because I see some harrowing images and interviews where clearly people have felt completely on their own, and that's the positive message would be to help them feel as though there was somebody looking out for them, they were trying to help them, and and use that to go forward. So I think you can have some positivity. I think you've got to be clear though that you can't try and I'm going to say lie. Don't try and hide things like you say, this is going to be all right by Christmas, or this is going to. We've had it all over the world really with particularly politicians trying to find some positive to talk about. So we'll be out of restrictions, this will be the last lockdown, this will be. Don't say it if you don't know it's true. Don't say it if you can't be 100% sure that it's going to be accurate, because it will be more damaging to have that come back and to people to say, well, you said it was going to be all right tomorrow when it's not. So yeah, there is positivity to be found within it, and I think as communicators we have to try and find the ways to build that into what we're talking about.
I think it can be hard sometimes, can't it? Because in a crisis situation, there's a lot of political problems, there's a lot of government influence, and it is hard to know how to say the right thing, that maybe in the interest of the public, but at the same time, protect your own bases, really, isn't it? That is a hard balance to have as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is, and I for many years worked for the police, so it didn't have an overtly kind of political element to worry about. So so my view was very much focused on what do we need to do to help people in this situation, not necessarily hugely focused on the politics around it. I left that to other people to worry about. But I think you can manage to balance those things out. But ultimately, the reputation of an organisation should never be more important than helping the people who are dealing with the crisis.
That is a really, really good point. No, definitely. Well, lots of interesting information in there, Amanda. I know one more thing about India that I've gathered from my research is that people, so influencers have become an emerging media professionals now. How do you think that small presence on social media or people with little influence can also contribute towards? Is it by directing people to the right place for information? Can they put out messages that say, stop looking, stop taking your news from anywhere you find it, but go to the right place? Or what sort of
Yeah.
is best?
I mean, I think influencers, this is the way of the world, isn't it? And they do have big audiences. A lot of people who operate in these sort of ways do have big audiences. So we need to be speaking to them. But I'm sure maybe you look at with the situations we're talking about, influencers want to be doing the right thing. They don't want to do something that's going to cause problems. They don't want to be seen to be ignoring situations. So bring them in, help them be part of that conversation, help them be, sharing information potentially. But also, yeah, they can say, if you want to get the up-to-date information, if you want to know what the situation is, then go to these places, so that you can build that sort of trusted voice around certain things. But that's going to take some time to do. That's, as I said, you can't just assume everybody's going to go to your website, to get all that information. But yeah, I mean, I see working with influencers is very much the same way as you would work with the media. They have an important role to play, because they have a lot of influence on social media. They have some great networks, and if you're in this sort of in national emergency, critical incident, crisis situation, then you want to be using every avenue. So I wouldn't discount anything until you've looked into how it could work, what it could do for you, and to see whether there's benefits there.
I think that's a really good point as well. It's about collaborating, isn't it? And I think that makes your work a lot less as well. And in a situation like that, where you mentioned that people trust local influencers more than the government, I think in a scenario like this point really shines, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amanda, did you have any final points that you wanted to conclude with? Because I think I laid out all the questions I had for you, but did you have anything you wanted to?
No, I just think, I mean, the thing for me is, and the reason I suppose we started this conversation was, I sat, thinking, what can I do? What can I do as an individual? And that's why I just put a thing out saying, if there was anybody in my networks that I could help, then let me know, and I would really want to help. And I would hope that this is something that builds going forwards. That we have the world is a smaller place now. We know that things that happen in one country are going to happen can influence another really quickly. And we look at how quickly everything spread in terms of COVID, shows how small the world is now. The key for me, I suppose, as communicators, is that we try and support each other as much as we can when these things happen and when things emerge like this, because it will happen again, unfortunately, and we will be in this position again. But let's hope that we can come together in a as much of a supportive way as possible.
Absolutely. I think when I did see your post on Sunday morning, it made me believe in the importance and the impact that communicators can, in a small way, but contribute towards a situation like that. So no, it's incredible. Thank you ever so much for your time, Amanda.
Thank you for asking me to speak.